All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Çağla Çelik, and I'm a career development specialist with West Virginia University Career Services Center. So today we will talk a little bit about salary negotiation and benefits review because it is a topic that scares off a lot of students, given that everybody is graduating with minimal to no experience in some cases. And this generation is graduating with an unprecedented student debt. So oftentimes everybody's nervous. They're kind of nervous about negotiating prematurely and basically having the offer rescinded because they would be perceived as like either ungrateful or they didn't know whether or not they should negotiate in this situation. So if you are also having question marks about this process and don't know what to do, you're at the right place. We're going to talk about all those things today. As I am presenting, if there are any questions that arise, just go ahead and drop your question in the chat function, and then we'll sort through and try to get to those questions in a timely manner. I can either do that throughout the presentation if it kind of goes with the flow, or maybe hold off on them until the end. So let's get started. First thing first, whenever you get a job offer, you should always respond to that job offer in writing. If you receive a phone call from a recruiter congratulating you and giving you an offer, it's great. Be very gracious and grateful, thank them for the opportunity, and then immediately afterwards request that they send the offer in writing. Verbal contracts hold no water. They don't mean anything, and you really need to cover all your bases and request that they communicate the offer to you and maybe in an email attachment so that you can see what it is that you're going to be signing up to or signing up for, and make a more informed decision. You can actually reframe it and basically request it in this form, like by indicating these things. So the second thing, before we get into any types of negotiation or talking about negotiation, in these situations where you need to negotiate, whether it be a business like closing a business deal or negotiating a hostage situation, you need to have what we call a leverage. Okay, and in this scenario, a lot of you are graduating with not a whole lot of leverage because usually these things occur during your professional life. For example, if you are a seasoned professional who has been in the industry in a very niche field for, let's say, 5 to 7 years, knowing all kinds of technical tools and processes about the position, it gives you a lot of leverage, right? But as a recent graduate, you need to think about, okay, what do I have to offer? Do they really want me in this position? Like, do they sound really enthusiastic about me joining their organization? Or do you maybe have a lot of really relevant and important internship experiences? Or did you get out of your way to maybe code different things or learn different programming languages if you are in computer science field? So whatever the case may be, you need to think about the leverage in terms of, do I have something that they want really, really badly? Because if you do, it gives you negotiation power. And if you don't, because working at the mall part-time selling stuffed animals hardly qualifies for leverage. So before you go into these situations rather aggressively, you need to do a self-assessment of, do I have what it takes? So keep that at the back of your mind, not only for job offer negotiation scenarios, but also in other scenarios in life. With that said, the other point that I want to make before we get into the nuts and bolts of negotiation is geography. This basically entails two things. First and foremost, the offer that you get is a relative offer. By that I mean a question, for example, maybe this could be a rhetorical question where you think about it a little bit, but when you think about $50,000 in Lincoln, Nebraska versus $120,000 in Los Angeles, which is worth more? Which offer would make you a little bit more excited? Because if you're going to go with the six figures, like 120,000 in Los Angeles, well, the cost of living kind of evens things out a little bit, because in LA, your bills are going to be higher, your rent, your cost of living is going to be higher. So the disposable income that you may end up with at the end of the day, maybe less than the $50,000 that you would end up with in Lincoln, Nebraska. So whenever you get that offer, you need to consider that within the scope of that geographical location. The other thing when it comes to geography is the point of view of supply and demand. For example, when I have student appointments with you all, oftentimes people indicate an interest in kind of like southern areas like Florida, like North Carolina. Charlotte is a very popular place that people want to move to once they graduate, and there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing that you need to know about these highly desirable locations is that, for example, people in Florida, they don't want to leave the beach, they don't want to leave the state. And luckily for them, there are a lot of good higher education institutions in Florida, so they stay. So the market gets oversaturated with graduates. And as a result, there are more degree holders than there are jobs. And by that same token, the market in Florida, they basically pay about the 70% of the national average to their people. Like they are 30% less than the national average when it comes to salaries across all different levels. And they get away with that because, again, it's a highly desirable location. And as an employer, they think, why would I pay you more when I have so many other people who are willing to work for less? So think about that. On the other side of the spectrum, if you think about maybe North Dakota, and there's nothing wrong with North Dakota, but it may be a little bit more, I don't know, colder or rural or out the way, but if you get a really good offer, and if the cost of living is low and they make about 30% more than the national average, because again, supply and demand, these people need employees, workers, so they're willing to pay a little bit more, would that make sense to you? So the question you need to ask yourself is, am I willing to move? And am I willing to go where the jobs are at? So that's a very critical question to ask. Okay, if we don't have any questions thus far, I'm gonna start getting into the discussion about salary negotiation slowly. Are we all good? Okay. So the number one thing you need to consider whenever you think about salary negotiation is that oftentimes people get confused about the distinction between compensation versus salary. Note this and remember for future references. Salary is not the same thing as compensation. Compensation is so much bigger than that. It may include the base salary, and then also all kinds of different benefits and basically maybe incentive packages like bonuses, sign-on bonuses, relocation bonuses, your healthcare, your retirement. So you need to think about these things a little bit more holistically rather than being hung up on that monetary amount. Okay. With that, remember this next time. Your benefits typically comprise approximately 25 to 30, 33% of your total compensation package. That means for every dollar you're making, about 30 cents of it is comprised of the benefits. So don't overlook it. And whenever you are thinking about evaluating a package, think about it as a whole. Remember this too. This is becoming increasingly more prevalent among most organizations. What they do is they basically hire these tech companies to create sophisticated salary matrices for them. And in these matrices, they always take the average college graduate. So what is an average college graduate? They either have no experience to minimal experience, maybe some internships. They have an acceptable GPA, maybe some volunteer experiences. So they take this average graduate. So when they look at your GPA, if you're in the top 10% of your class, that may give you maybe $1,000, $2,000 bump compared to the base level for an average graduate. And then they enter in your experiences. If you have, let's say, 1 internship or 2 internships, something that again sets you apart, they kind of enter that information into the matrix, and basically it gives maybe another $1,000 bump. If you're ex-military, if you're a non-traditional student with real world experience, these things will give you some bumps as well. So at the end of the day, in college recruiting cases, whenever they give you an offer, usually they have already taken your GPA, your internships, and other things into consideration. Okay, if you're thinking about, okay, my GPA is 3.9, maybe I should try to negotiate another $1,000. Well, remember that they will have already kind of accounted for that. So when you're going into this negotiation table rather aggressively with that as your leverage, think again. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you should never negotiate as a recent graduate. It's going to come down to leverage. How much leverage power do I have is the question you need to ask yourself. Okay, aside from the matrices, let's talk a little bit about knowing your worth, okay, and researching your professional going rate. Because you really need to sit down and do a self-assessment of, okay, what am I looking at? What am I hoping to make, once I graduate from college? And you can't just determine that number kind of subjectively or unrealistically, because what you deem to be appropriate for your field may not be the realistic market value that is going on right now. So for that reason, you need to sit down and do some research. I'm going to share a few resources with you in terms of like different websites and different resources that will help you determine that range. So you're going to sit down and utilize these resources. onuscenter.org is a great resource that gives you information about, it's basically put together by Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they have so many good information about the geographical location for a given industry. And maybe if you type the job title that you are interested in, it kind of gives you all that information. And the average salary with the higher end and the lower end, it kind of gives you a range and understanding. You can use salary.com, salaryexpert.com, payscale.com, which is not on here, but it's also a great resource. Don't be limited to just one resource. Try to utilize as many as you can. And finally, something that I always personally go to is glassdoor.com. Glassdoor.com is very insightful in the sense that usually the employees that work for an organization do complete anonymous surveys. And in those surveys, they indicate how much money they're making. So they're employer reported and can give you a lot of insights about not just the salary expectations, but also about the culture of the company, the work conditions, the how much value does this company give to their employees type of insights. So anyways, you basically put together this information and listen carefully because this part is really important. You come up with a range. Never ever come up with a one-off answer like $50,000. You should always determine a range with the lower end being your minimum acceptable amount. And then the upper end is going to be determined by obviously your leverage power, your level of experience, but oftentimes it's either $5,000 or $10,000 more. And whatever, even if they give you your minimum, you will still be happy because you research, the average going rate for similar jobs in your industry. So at the end of the day, you will still be happy about it. Oftentimes though, a few things to mention here. Whenever you get a phone call from recruiters, usually those are used as screening calls and they want to get a sense for your salary expectations. So whenever you apply for a position, I would highly suggest that you do that research prior to, like maybe as soon as you send in that application, so that if you get the phone call from the recruiter, you wouldn't be, estimating, you would be as informed as possible. The other thing is that sometimes they make you fill out so the job application, and in the job application, there's a section specifically asking for your salary expectations, and they may not allow you to do a range. If that's the case, again, come up with the average and then kind of plug it in there. So the other question that I oftentimes get from students is that, when should I bring up salary? When should I have this conversation with a recruiter, right? So I'm sure many of you ask this question to yourself, like, should I bring the question of salary myself or should I wait for their cue? So never ever bring the salary question yourself. Always wait for their response, and hopefully it will come up sometime at the end of the first interview. One thing to be, to kind of keep in mind here is that if they ask you that question prematurely, you need to delay it, because if you don't demonstrate your skills and qualifications in the interview, if you don't get them to buy in to your skills and qualifications and prove to them that you would be a great candidate for their organization, they're not going to be willing to negotiate, or they're not going to be open to your salary expectations yet. So at the beginning, for example, if they go ahead and ask, so what are you hoping to make exactly in this job? Let's say within the first 5 minutes. Well, if you can defer by saying something like, as I'm still learning more about this position, and in this interview, I'm hoping to learn more. Even though I have a tentative salary expectation, I'd like to hold off to show you my qualifications and my fit for this position first. Would it be okay with you if we waited till the end of the interview to discuss salary? So that's a very strategic and appropriate way of deferring. The other pointer here is that if you are a working professional, or in the future you will be one, let's say like 5 years down the road, never ever indicate your salary history. And the problem is that the job you had in the past may not be comparable to the job that you're applying to. There might be more responsibilities. There might be more demanding, qualifications or whatever that you've developed over that 5-year period. And if you give them the history, well, if they're thinking about, let's say, $60,000 for the next role, and if you tell them 40,000, they may lowball you at like 45 or 50. At the same time, don't lie and try to be as diplomatic as possible. Like, don't say I was making 75,000 when you were making 40, because HR people talk and they sometimes have a way of verifying that information. But at the same time, you may say something like, the job description for my old position is very different from the one that I'm interviewing for right now. I don't think the numbers will be comparable. However, I would hope and expect a salary offer from you that is comparable to the industry standards for similar positions. And then you can give them your range. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but hopefully this is making sense. Again, if you have any questions at this point, go ahead and drop it in the chat, because we're going to start dissecting those specific benefits within the compensation package soon. So are we all doing good? No questions so far. Okay. So let's get into the ins and outs of this benefits package. These are some of the commonly offered benefits, and I will walk through the most important of these items on the list. For example, medical benefits. Again, another rhetorical question, because this presentation is rather uninteractive, but ask yourself this question: how much money a family of 4 in the United States spends for health insurance? Think about that. Because if you're thinking about hundreds, that's an underestimation. Okay, health insurance is expensive. It is about $1,500 to $2,000 for a family of 4 monthly. It's not even annually. Every month, that's the amount that they pay. And depending on the individual circumstances, it could be a little more, it could be a little less. But the long story short is that never ever estimate the coverage and the importance of the healthcare benefits. Certain things to kind of keep in mind about is, does it cover everything? Because some companies, they only pay a portion of it and then you're responsible for the rest. And even though you get coverage, sometimes there are deductibles, there are premiums, co-pays. You need to kind of look into, again, specifically to the healthcare package and see if it's desirable. For example, if you are a single individual who's relatively healthy, Maybe you can go for a higher deductible, lower premium package versus if you have a family and many kids and they oftentimes get sick and you always end up in the emergency room, maybe a low deductible and high premium package might be better for you. This is to say, it depends on the individual. And if you have questions about it, again, I'm going to add this shameless plug of come schedule an appointment with us, and then we will definitely discuss your individual circumstances based on where you're standing on that spectrum. So aside from the medical benefits, there's another thing that you need to consider, which is retirement. So in the past, you would basically get a pension once you retire, right? Government would support your retirement, but I don't remember how long ago this was, but the retirement has also been privatized in the United States. So now you are in charge and are responsible for your own retirement. And if you've ever heard the term 401k, it basically indicates a retirement plan that you basically start investing now. When you get a job, you basically allocate a portion of your salary into this retirement package, and over time it accumulates with compound interest. And at the end of 40, 50 years of you working, finally, getting ready to retire, you will have hopefully a healthy amount. So it is not optional, guys. You need to really, really pay attention to this. The moment you get a job, you need to start investing into your retirement because you need literally millions of dollars to live comfortably after retirement. So for example, if you start investing at the age of 25, approximately, again, if you're making like $50,000, by the time you retire, you're going to have, again, let's say you make minimum contributions. You're going to have about 900 something to $1 million in this account. If you wait till the age of 35, if you wait 10 years, this amount will go down to like $300,000 to $400,000. So that's a huge difference because of, again, the compound interest. So the moment you start a position, start investing into a retirement. So the other point to be made here is the term vesting, which is to say that a lot of companies, in order to sweeten the deal a little bit, match your dollar for dollar contributions into the retirement account. Let's say you get the job and decided to invest 5% monthly into your retirement account. And the company goes and says, if you invest 5%, I'm going to match that and I'm going to put that amount in your retirement account as well. Again, it is to sweeten the deal, make them more desirable for the potential talent and candidates. So here's the vesting period and where it kind of comes into play. Let's say you accepted a job and you love the position, you're very happy about it, and annually you're basically putting $5,000 into this retirement account, and then your company matches that $5,000 every year for you. When you first signed the job offer, it says something about retirement, vesting period, but you didn't know what it was. You just signed it off and happily started this position. So it's about 3.5 years. You're getting a little burnt out. You don't know if it's the best position for you. Maybe it's time for you to start looking into other opportunities. So in year 4, you're like, okay, I'm going to start applying to positions, and you basically finish year 4, and halfway through year 5, you find a new position, you say adios, and then move on to the next role. So here's what you did. Your job offer package said a 5-year vesting period. It's a binding contract, right? By leaving at year 4.5, here's what you lost. All the contributions that company made because there was a 5-year vesting period in your contract. Had you quit 6 months after than the time you did, you would have basically saved yourself $5, $10, $15, $20, $22,500. So you basically left that at the table because you didn't pay attention to the terminology and the jargon in the benefits package. This is to say, again, this is a dramatic case, but read that job description, the job offer literally line by line and try to make sure try to make sense of all the information. And if you have doubts about it, if you don't know how to interpret certain things, well, come to Career Services and we're here to help you. Okay, now that I scared you off and got your attention, let's move forward with the other options and the benefits. So pre-tax options, again, I'm not a tax accountant, so I'm just gonna ramble on about this for long, but when I first got my position here at West Virginia University, I received a phone call from the parking office and they were like, so you're paying for parking, do you want this charge to be pre or post-tax? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So this is to say, sometimes you may be faced with situations where you can pay for something either on pre-tax terms or post-tax terms. Long story short, if you select the pre-tax option, you're going to be saving yourself some money because your disposable income, your taxable income is going to be a lot lower since they deducted the expenses prior to taxing you. This may not always be an option, but when it's an option, try to take that. It might be beneficial for you. And there might be certain cases where it may not be though. Again, I'm not an accountant. Discuss with a tax accountant with regards to this issue if you have dramatic cases. So I'm just letting you know that this is a thing so that when you're in the real world, you don't pull a Çağla and be like, what is the pre-tax option? All right. Now that we kind of covered the big guys, let's talk a little bit about what is negotiable. So oftentimes, as a recent college graduate, your base salary may not be all that flexible because you don't necessarily have a huge negotiation power yet, right? And then there are also other things in that benefits package that are not negotiable. For example, your healthcare plan, your retirement. These are considered by law universal packages, and the organizations have to offer the exact same package across all levels of employees. The CEO of the company will get the same healthcare plan as you. There's no such thing as, hey, can I just pay this much and get this much coverage? Like, no, it's all equal across the board. This is to say, I don't want you wasting your time trying to negotiate on things that are not negotiable. However, are there other things that are negotiable? Yes. For example, sign-on bonus. This is not something that every recruiter will offer up freely. It's just not. It's one of those things that you may need to inquire about, but you need to have a good case for it. For example, a lot of recruiters are kind of reticent about making exceptions on the base salary offer because they don't want those discrepancies across the organization for people in similar jobs, because then people are going to talk, it's going to create organizational, what's the opposite of cohesion, like organizational conflict, right? So they're not willing to make a lot of changes on the base salary level, but they're more than happy to accommodate you in the form of a sign-on bonus if you have leverage, because the sign-on bonus is a one-time deal, right? If they give you a $5,000 sign-on bonus, it's a one-time deal. It's not going to hang over on their head. And the employees usually can't compare that because their on paper base salary is similar or the same. This is to say, I've seen some people literally get a $15,000 sign-on bonus. Sometimes it's not offered at all. It really depends on the organization, but unless you ask, most people will not offer this freely. In the future, let's say you are a working professional and you're looking for a job in the middle of a bonus cycle, but you just can't stand the company anymore. There aren't a lot of opportunities, so you want to leave, right? So when you get the offer, and it's kind of comparable, but you kind of want to negotiate more, maybe you can say something like, you know, if I leave this job, I'm leaving in the middle of a bonus cycle, so I'm going to be leaving about $10,000 on the table. So I appreciate the base salary offer. We've already negotiated that, but also, can you offer up any sign-on bonuses to make up for the amount that I'll be losing for leaving in the middle of this bonus cycle? So that's a very appropriate way of asking for this. The other thing is the stock-based compensation. One thing that I want you all to think about is that if you work for a big company that is publicly traded, never underestimate the power of stock-based compensation, because as the company grows and their value kind of gets bigger and bigger, your compensation will also get bigger and bigger, right? It basically grows. It's an investment for your future. So one of my mentors always tells us the story of when he had a student about like a decade ago, and she landed on a job that required her to move to Europe to start like some facilities in Europe. And she got this job at this company that no one heard of, Amazon.com. Okay. So she accepts the position. She loves it because she always wanted to live in Europe. The base salary is not that great. And overall, still to this day, Amazon pays about 70% of the market rates to their employees. But they offered up a pretty lucrative stock-based compensation option, which didn't seem that significant to her. That is to say, she's now a millionaire because we all know Amazon.com and what their stock is, Jeff Bezos, hello. So you may not face these like dramatic situations in life, but this example shows you that you should never underestimate if this is an option that's given to you. The third option is the relocation expenses. And again, most companies are offering, like may offer these things to sweeten the deal. They know that students are cash poor, right? And if you will be relocating from Morgantown to, let's say, Colorado, I mean, it's a significant relocation expense. And oftentimes you would need to pay deposit for rent, or get professional attire if you don't have as much or as many and the position requires you to suit up every day. So that's what the relocation expense is kind of for. Again, they're not going to offer it freely oftentimes, and you may need to ask for it. It can come in the form of two different things. If they can give you money, like let's say $3,000, they cut that check and it's for you. You can do whatever you want with that money. If everything you own fits into your Honda Civic, well, drive and keep the money and maybe buy some of the necessities. So that's one way. The other way is some companies only offer, like they get the mover company for you. They basically pack your everything, like cover all the relocation related things. But again, this is something you can negotiate and you should negotiate. Let's say you try to negotiate these points and everything failed. Well, maybe talk about work flexibility, especially after COVID. Working from home is becoming more and more of the norm. I'm not going to say every, but most organizations are offering some kind of flexible work arrangement, and maybe negotiate if you could work from home 1 or 2 days of the week. I mean, if they say yes, it's less commute time, especially if you live in a metropolitan area. It is less driving, it's more money in your pocket, and it's a pretty sweet deal. Like we all love working from home, right? So the last thing that you may want to negotiate is vacation flexibility, but I would be erring on the side of caution when it comes to this, because you don't want your first impressions to be, can I get more paid time off, right? It doesn't come across as someone who is success driven or who's that invested in the professional work they do. But at the same time, let's say your best friend is getting married in a month, and it kind of coincides with a week after you start this new position. So this is something you need to negotiate at that table before you start and accept the offer, because you will not have accrued leave time yet when that wedding comes, right? So you may, and the wedding is maybe a getaway wedding in Caribbean. So this is something you can negotiate and say, I have a prior commitment during this week. I know I will not have accrued enough time for that yet, but would it be possible if I take this and this day off? I just wanted to kind of be transparent before I accepted this offer to see if you can make that arrangement. If not, can I maybe start a week later? So things like that, as long as you have tact and a good substantive kind of reasoning for asking for things, if you can frame it in a kind of professional and strategic way, anything is possible. You just need to know what is acceptable and what is not. All right, well, any questions about how to negotiate, what to negotiate, the base salary, the compensation, everything we talked about so far? Well, okay, I will continue and hope that you will drop it in the chat if you do have those questions. Now, what should I look for in a contract, which is pretty significant too. It kind of goes back to the vesting conversation we just had. So definitely check the start date. It is incredibly important because you don't want to verbally establish a date and it's saying something and you sign off, and it creates a lot of conflicts. So the other thing is check the salary information, make sure the numbers kind of add up, check the benefits. The other thing here is that a lot of people haven't even heard of the non-compete clauses, and they can be pretty, I will say, touchy-feely. So here's how. In certain businesses where you keep a book of business, a kind of book of clientele, they don't want you starting a job there, building a clientele base, and then take it all with you to a competitor. That's why they make you sign a non-compete clause. In these scenarios, usually you are prohibited from, like, again, if you sign that contract, you're prohibited from quitting the job and working for a competitor within a certain mile radius. Like, usually it is 250. They don't want you being in the same city. I know it may sound ridiculous, but here's a real life story. My previous boss, her brother worked for a financial advisor company in California, in Los Angeles. So he basically quit his job, started working for a competitor, and he had already signed a non-compete clause for the previous position. The company sued him and they won, and they literally made him quit his job by court, like by law, literally. So remember what you're signing up for. Think about the repercussions of you not honoring that contract. It is very important. And it kind of goes into the next thing that I'm going to discuss, which is a relocation clause. It is also very common for rotational programs. If you've ever heard of like different programs such as management training program, leadership development program, these types of jobs are on rotational basis. They want you to experience different departments of the organization and also different branches of the organization. So they may make you bounce off different cities every 6 months and for, like, let's say 2 years. And if you sign this relocation clause, and let's say on your third rotation, you meet the love of your life and you want to settle down and live in that city, you won't be able to, because as long as you're employed, you have to honor the contract unless other arrangements have been made with your supervisor, or you can always quit the job. So you have 2 options at that point. Remember that the relocation clause next time you, again, get a job offer. The last one is more for like STEM related, tech related industries. They make you sign an intellectual property clause, and oftentimes they are pretty binding and pretty excessive. By that I mean, even if you work on a project in your garage in your spare time, let's say, and if you produce something that is kind of life-changing, incredible, people are getting in line to get licensing from you, well, your company may come and claim ownership, because as long as you're employed with them, even though you create something outside of your work hours, it's still considered their intellectual property. So if you're in a STEM field, if you're in an engineering field, remember that and act accordingly. All right, so these are the contract related items. Let me see what we have in the chat function. Would it be better to ask for negotiations in an email or via a phone call? That's a great question. And straight up, I will say probably in a phone call or a Zoom conversation if you can. If not, an email would be appropriate too, but oftentimes, again, it's my preference, and I think it's recommended that you have that one-on-one conversation so that you can feel it out. You can gauge their tone, and it could be like responding back and forth may be a little bit more difficult in an email format. So I will personally recommend that it's either made through a phone call or in person. Hopefully that helps. All right, let's see. Yeah. The last thing that I'm going to talk about here is rating the importance. We change, our priorities change, right? Like right now, I don't have a comprehensive healthcare package, but later when I decide to have a family, I might switch. Or later, if you want to have a family, maybe job security, working from home, or childcare arrangements, if your company offers one, may take more precedent than the pay, the location, or some of the benefits. For example, if you already have a master's degree, if they offer a really competitive tuition reimbursement package, it may not be applicable to you. So this is to say, we all have our individual circumstances. You need to sit down and rate the importance and come up with maybe your top 5 priority things that you want to get out of a position, and pick and choose your battles before you go into the negotiation phase, and not go at them like all at once. So it's really important to determine and kind of prioritize those things. Lastly, I want you to kind of think about this very clearly, is that oftentimes students are uncomfortable with the idea that they're interviewing with multiple companies at the same time. They think that it's kind of inappropriate, and I will be the first person to kind of ease those fears and tell you that it is expected of you to be in the interview process for multiple companies at the same time. As you're graduating, everybody is aware of it. It's not a taboo, and therefore you will accept some offers and reject some offers. That's perfectly normal. The other thing that I can easily tell you is that, let's say your qualifications are on high demand and you have 2 or 3 job offers from different companies. One company you really like, that's where your heart is kind of set on, but their base salary offer is a little less than the other one. So the other one still is a pretty good opportunity, but either their culture or the interview, something just didn't resonate with you. Be comfortable and not be afraid of saying something like this. Maybe going back to the company that your heart is set on and be like, you know, I also have competing offers given I'm in the job search process and interviewing with multiple companies, but I really want to work for you because of X, Y, and Z. You be very, very clear and articulate about your reasons. So the offer that I've gotten from them is a little better in terms of base salary. And obviously I want to make the best decision for myself, the best financial decision and best career decision. So since I'm really passionate about your organization, would you consider upping that offer a little bit? Again, that's perfectly normal. That additional job offer gives you what I call a leverage. So this is just a side note. It's perfectly okay. I'm kind of giving you permission to be okay with these things, but at the same time, there's an etiquette when it comes to either accepting or rejecting an offer. So accepting is pretty normal. There's no hard feelings, right? But when you reject, you have to be very professional. Don't burn any bridges, and be very grateful in your initial line for the opportunity. And you basically say that you regret to inform that you'll be accepting another offer, but that was a very difficult decision for you. You wish them the best and you hope that you cross paths in the future. So kind of leaving that door a little open and not terminating things completely. So this is how you reject an offer. You can do it in an email, preferably. Unless they call you and tell them on the spot, which I don't recommend. So this is something I recommend you do via email, but that negotiation piece, like Adam asked, probably either in person or on the phone. So I have another question. Why do companies act weird when you ask them about pay during second or third interview? Obviously they're interested, so why do they not like to throw out an actual number before the offer letter? Well, it depends on the company policy. Even within the same company, the HR person that you're dealing with, right? They may have different preferences, different kind of tones. But honestly, when you're in the interview process still, you don't even know if you're going to get a job offer. You don't even know if they're going to want you, or at the end may end up deciding to work with another candidate. So it kind of takes that leverage power away from you a little bit, because if I'm not sure whether or not I want to work with you, and if you keep bringing up salary, it kind of rubs the certain people the wrong way. And I will say there's also a generational difference. Like older people may react to it a little differently because of their generation. They've been taught to be grateful and not be money oriented and like really go for the opportunity. But with our generation, we know about the student debt, we know about the difficulties that our generation need to face compared to their generation. So the younger people tend to be, or younger organizations tend to be a little bit more lenient about the salary conversations. So I will say again, Madison, it will depend on the organization and even the HR person. But the golden rule here is that you wait till they bring up salary, especially as a recent college graduate. It's normal to have those conversations after you get a job offer. But if you're a seasoned professional, oftentimes these conversations come up even in the first round of interviews. So remember that. I know it's annoying, but it's just the truth, the reality of it. Hope this answers your question. Any other questions? Because this is my shameless plug about coming and schedule an appointment with me if it gets overwhelming. But right after that, I have the question slide. Aside from Adam and Madison, do I have any other questions from you?
I've got a little question just to get advice, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm in a situation, I graduate in May, and I have a job offer that was actually due by yesterday that I was able to get an extension till November 1st. Because I'm most interested in getting a job from another company who I worked for this past summer, but unfortunately they do not have a time frame as to when they will get back to me. And so while I would very much prefer to work for the company that I do not have an offer from, debating essentially I have one bird in my hand and two birds in the bush. Do I accept what I have now because it's not that bad, although my advisor says their offer was relatively low? And I'm considering negotiating with them, or do I actually hold off and consider options in the future, essentially, and decline this offer?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, I will say, and I'll be very transparent with you. Someone really close to me was in the same situation till today. So here's how they handled it. So remember my comment about letting them kind of bid for you a little bit. So there's no problem in saying, like, contacting the company that you want to work for and be like, I have multiple job offers, but my heart is really set on your on your organization because of reasons X, Y, and Z. Again, you need to indicate those things. Why are you interested in them? Kind of make them proud a little bit, right? As a company. And then saying something like, I would hate to pressure you or put this on you, but the time frame that I've been given by them to give them an answer is up soon. So would it be possible, whether, as a yes or no, to tell me if you are interested in making me an offer, because I would hate to commit to something and not be able to say yes to you, even though my heart is set on your organization.
Sure.
So there's nothing wrong with approaching them with that information, and they may give you an answer and may not give you an answer. Like, it's entirely up to them still. And at that point, you have a decision to make. Well, your heart is set on the other company, but at the same time, you have an offer from a company that seems rather enthusiastic about you. So maybe sit down and start thinking about the company culture. Sit down and start thinking about opportunities for growth, like upward mobility, maybe a little better in the offer that you're getting. That's a little, like, relatively less than the potential offer you may get, and other kind of criteria if you are in doubt. But I think there's nothing wrong with you approaching the employer with the advice that I've just given you and see what they say.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. Let's see, another question from Gregory. Are there any major differences in approaching interviewing negotiation when graduating with a PhD versus undergrad? Absolutely, because well, leverage, right? You have a very niche specialty as a PhD, as a doctor. So you definitely need to use that leverage. And based on the job description, the qualifications that they're looking for, your PhD or all that education you put into your research, they all count for years of experience or commensurating experience, even though it may not be real world experience in the sense that it's in a full-time job. Well, PhD is a full-time job. So you can definitely use that to your advantage and as a leverage to appropriately negotiate a better salary than an amount that would be given to an undergraduate student, 100%. 100%. Same like with the masters too. Same with the masters. Oftentimes when people want to move up within the same organization, a master's degree sometimes is a condition, because a master's degree, again, in most cases, remember that salary matrix that I talked to you about at the beginning of this the presentation, it kind of gives you some leverage to get a pay increase. Again, I don't know what that amount might be, but higher education definitely affects those conversations. And as a PhD, yes, you have more leverage and you should negotiate a little bit harder and for a higher amount.
I've got a question that kind of builds off of that. So I'm in a PhD program, but I'm planning to kind of leave it's a STEM, so it's research based, and I'm planning to leave the academic and research field. So in that case, you know, while I have the PhD and I have a strong background in my field, where I want to go, you know, some people who may have, I want to go to communication. So some people who have had more opportunities because they did something where they did more writing or more work with like certain productions would have more work experience. So how should I approach things like leverage, where my leverage is just, well, I have a PhD?
That's a good question. And I will say that definitely schedule an appointment with me and you and I can have a one-on-one conversation, because I'm not going to be able to give you a straight answer. There are so many variables that may come into play with that scenario. For example, how relevant is your PhD to the job description, or is your quantitative background, like let's say the position that you're going into is at a research institute that does a lot of quantitative research related things, or is it strictly communications? Because in that case, you may not be at an advantage, or you may not have what I call the leverage. So it will really depend on, again, the job description, the industry, and how relevant your skills may be. Because if those things, like if these boxes are unchecked, in that case, you don't necessarily have a leverage, and they could care less if someone has a PhD if you're not a good fit for whatever position that they're trying to fill, or they may care more about the people in the industry that have the what I call real world experience. So as someone who also aspires to become a PhD one day, you and I may have a more candid conversation on a one-on-one basis and maybe schedule an appointment with me, okay?
Absolutely, thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Any other questions? I have one more in the chat. As a follow-up, I'm most interested in government positions, but all my previous work experience is in private sector. Are there any differences I should be aware of in the interview and negotiation process for government jobs, especially federal jobs? So Gregory, I'll be honest with you, oftentimes the opposite of it is a problem. Like you have experience in the government, which may not be as fast-paced or competitive compared to the private industry, and going into the private industry, that may come in as a, I'm not gonna say a deterrent, but not as preferable, I guess. In your case, since you're going from private to government, that should not be a problem. You just need to know the different, I think they're called GS levels for the federal government specifically. And you just need to, for the federal position, read the job description and basically how many of those qualifications that they indicate you fulfill. Because if you check all the boxes, then that's all you need for negotiation power. And oftentimes, negotiation is pretty limited in government jobs compared to private industry, like the flexibility and what they can do for you from that base salary, because like I said, they don't want to create discrepancies across different levels of or across the same level positions across the organization. So think about that a little bit. Maybe that's something that you should be aware of, but other than that, I don't think anything will be different. You will still need to tailor your answers in the interviewing situation to the specific position. You will make sure that you check all the boxes in terms of qualifications and the duties you'll be performing in the role, and do a lot of catering, and know that your negotiation power may be a little more limited than a private industry where, you know, they have more flexibility. Hope that makes sense. Perfect. All right. Any other last questions? Because we're gonna end it pretty quickly. Perfect, Danica. Gregory, this is for you. usjobs.gov is the main resource, and they have a lot of webinars on a, you know, on a monthly basis. In fact, that kind of teaches you or educates you about their interview processes, or even the negotiation process in some cases, if they have such workshops. All righty, well, I will thank you for your time and energy and participation to this presentation today. I hope to do these presentations every semester. So if you have any questions after this presentation, please come and schedule an appointment with us. And I hope you all have a great day. My pleasure. Bye.